Good evening. This is an introduction to the Book of Mormon. It's archaeology and geography of North America. And the work that is here is I'm responsible for, plus the references that are noted. And I have no connection, authority from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is all on Wayne May. So if there's something here that falls in disfavor, contact me, please. So this is the introduction to the book. So the big question is, what did Joseph actually know? We need to keep in mind that the Book of Mormon was written for the Lamanites. It wasn't written to be a history textbook for us in the latter days, or a geography book, or a book on languages, or what have you. But the point is, Joseph did leave a lot of good information behind that will help us to view into those types of things, plus the evidence that is available here on the Promised Land. And so what has happened to the situation is that now the question really becomes, is it a one hill Cumorah or is it two? Because for those who support a Central or South American situation, then you have to have two Cumorahs. That means the main fight took place in Central America, and eventually then Moroni would have wandered up here by himself to present day Palmyra, New York, and buried the plates there, and that would become a second hill Cumorah. But I'm a one Cumorah guy, and I believe there is only one, there is not two. And that's what I hope to present to you this evening, what I want to show you for what is out there. So the big thing is, instead of looking south, I'm asking you to look to the east. Look to the east in the heartland of North America. And the question again to ask is, are the Hopewell and the Nephites the same people? So the Hopewell, this is a group of people that has been discovered in the archaeological record that fits the timeline for the Book of Mormon, and that makes it extremely interesting. I mean, it's really exact, and we'll show all that in upcoming slides. But the Hopewell in itself is just a name, and we'll discuss that as well. It could be your last name, it could be any name. It's a name that was given. So the point is, this culture was named Hopewell for a reason, and I said before, we will get there. And of course, if the Hopewell is there, and if that is correct, then the Promised Land really is United States of America. And that's what we hope to show tonight. So, but other people are still searching for the Promised Land. Some are not totally satisfied. We're always looking for Zarahemla, the big capital of Mormons for the Book of Mormon itself. Key. Most of the battles took place in and around Zarahemla and all the other smaller conflicts. So Zarahemla is really a key. So we're also searching for that. And of course, everybody always asks, where is the narrow pass? Where is the neck? And in the Book of Mormon, there's not just one. There is a neck and there is a pass, and there is a difference from one to the other. Again, we'll discuss that as well. Now, one of the things that I have found out living out in what you would call the mission field, I live in Wisconsin. I run into a lot of people that I talk to, and I tell them about the Book of Mormon and that I'm looking for historical and archaeological evidence to support it in a physical sense, besides its spiritual context. And so the first reason is what do the archaeologists and the historians and the anthropologists, why do they deny the Book of Mormon right off? And so I ask you, why do they turn from the Book of Mormon? Well, like most people that I ask who are members of the church, the first answer is that, well, they don't accept the vision in the sacred grove from Joseph Smith. I said, well, that's not really correct. Well, that is a good one, but it's not the first one. The very first reason they will turn away from the Book of Mormon is because the Book of Mormon supports what's called diffusion. Every person in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a diffusionist, and most members don't realize that. Our universities, our schools, all teach isolationism. Diffusionism means that prior to Christopher Columbus, other cultures of the world came to the Promised Land, wherever that is for you, and they got here by boat. And that flies in the face of a lot of archaeologists who want to support, in North America, a isolationist theory. And the big reason is that they claim that ancient man had no maritime technology. So right away, if you're reading the Book of Mormon, it's obvious. You're looking at the Jaredites came here by boat, the Nephites came here by boat, and the Mulekites got here by boat. So right away, the Book of Mormon, to Secular anthropologists and archaeologists, historians, they have a problem with it because we're claiming they crossed the oceans, that they did indeed have maritime technology. And that's the part that really gets them all excited. They just don't accept it. So we have to go hunting for all kinds of signs. Now, when I joined the church in 1970, I want you to know that my conversion to this gospel had nothing to do with archaeology. I was converted completely by the Spirit. My archaeological interest, comparing the two Cumorah theory, would not blossom until 1989. So I'm in the church for about 19 years before all this really starts to really chew on me inside, because up to that time, I was content with Central America, South America. It didn't matter. It really didn't matter. But as I learned more and more in the gospel of Jesus Christ, I realized that the promised land is a covenant land, and it does matter. It really does matter. So you ask yourself, why do you go to Jerusalem? Why do people go to Athens? Why do people go to Egypt? They go there because they want to walk in the historical contents of the other people they've read about. And with that point in mind, I think we should be able to go and walk where the Nephites walked. So anyway, South America, I was taught in 1970 that the first landing took place some down there in this Isthmus of Darien, about 590, that the Book of Mormon events took place South and Central America, covered all that area. The Book of Mormon itself, there are several locations for a hill for Meso supporters. They have not agreed to one hill for a location, so they have several locations, at least 4 good ones, and that's how they pick them on in Central America. And so a little confusion. They don't record and make it public. So right up there, that's the Book of Mormon. Moroni says his farewell in 421 AD. So in a really quick nutshell, this is the two-hill Cumorah theory. And this is the theory that I do not accept. I believe in a one Cumorah, that Palmyra, New York is the hill Cumorah. So let's take a look here. Here again is the United States. Mesoamerica guys now have pretty much focused on Central America. They're not looking too hard into South America anymore. And they've got about 1,000 square miles right down there in the Yucatan Peninsula and a little bit outside. And they claim this is where everything took place for that 1,000-year period for Nephi and Lehi, and also for the Jaredites, which was a 1,700-year window. A lot of time take place in that 1,000 square miles. So this is where the Mesoamerican model takes place according to them. Now, people supporting a one-hill Cumorah, out of respect for the scholars at BYU and other places, they took that 1,000 square miles and they put it into the Great Lakes area, in particular Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And then they began to take the story of the Book of Mormon and cram it all within that 1,000 square mile. And the minute they do that, they find out that the archaeology is not there, because it kind of begins around 100 AD. It doesn't go back deep enough, and the Meso guys know this, and so they criticize the limited model because it doesn't have any historical context that's as long to cover the time period for the Book of Mormon. And they're absolutely correct. It's too small. That's why we call it the limited model. They're in the right location, but it's just not big enough. To support this area, you got to go big. And once you go big, you take in the Hopewell people of North America. The Hopewell interaction sphere, 550 BC to 400 AD. And these are our Hopewell Mound builders. And this is what the Heartland looks like. This was done in 1890. And their best guesstimate is this is probably about 10% of what was there on first contact, right after Chris arrives in the 1490s. So a lot of destruction has already taken place. All these red dots now, this covers the Adena timeline, it covers the Hopewell timeline, and the Mississippian timeline. But this represents all the mound builders, and those are the 3 principal groups that we pick on. You can see the density where things are packed in. And they're also, of course, they're very, very tight to all the major rivers. But you can see where they are. And again, this is about 10% of what's left. When it's finally in the 1890s, they begin to gather the data and mark and locate these places and put them on all these beautiful maps. So this was done by the Smithsonian, by the way. It's a marvelous, marvelous map. So today, when you go out back there, there are several places that are preserved that you can go and visit. However, where's the 90%? What happened to them? Well, it was very simple. This right here is wholesale destruction. The mounds were leveled for all kinds of reasons. You just use landfill to fill in a swamp next to a growing community. They were used to flatten a field so it could be easier to work with a horse and the plow, but it was really just wholesale destruction. And it's unfortunate that we had to sprawl that quickly and to be so fast to knock down the earth, the earth mounds that was left behind by this unknown people that we just simply apply a name to, like Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippians. And we know a little bit about them more and more as we learn, as we look into the ground. Now I want to show you this here so you can see how fast this goes. Right here on the upper left, on your upper left, as you look at this here, that is probably 2/3 of a mound that was sitting in downtown St. Louis, Missouri. It's as big or bigger than Cahokia Mound, which still stands today on East St. Louis across the river. And then right to the right of it there, that's all that is left. They took it completely down 100%. There is nothing left of it today. Just want to show you how fast these things go down and torn apart. And then down the bottom, I just got a couple of pictures of work crews taking down mounds. And you can see how they do it. They start at the ground level and just go into it and take off a slice at a time. And this is what happened to the mounds. They're gone. And unfortunately, many times on the small burials, this is a typical Sunday afternoon, and a burial was dug up just for something to do for the afternoon excitement. And as you can see, the mess to the right, this is what's left behind. And again, this was a person. This is really unfortunate that this had to happen. It's very sad, but this is what began. This is what's happened to our mounds, our mound builder people in North America. But we're going to continue to explore and show and expose more on the Hopewell people, and that's what's coming.
All right. I'm admitting quite a few people right now, so bear with me. I'm multitasking here, but I want to share my screen and summarize what we just heard from Wayne May. So 1 hill versus 2 hill Cumorah. Were the Hopewell Indians the Nephites? Were they actually? Hold on here. Let me get this sharing properly. There we go. Excellent. There we go. 1 hill versus 2 hill Cumorah. Hope and trust that you can see that. So the real pressing question is, were the Hopewell Indians the Nephite nation? Of course, there are those of us that subscribe to the Heartland model. And of course, that's pretty controversial. But what Wayne points out is there's a reason for that. And the reason is because Mormons, well, were diffusionists, if you'll recall. And what he didn't mention is that we subscribe to a pre-Columbian historical perspective by default. And what is that? Well, it's basically as described, Wikipedia, not the ultimate resource, but there you have it. Those of us that understand that there were many cultures that were pre-Columbian or pre-Columbus, we are diffusionists. We're pre-Columbian. We understand that there were civilizations, and most especially the ones that parallel the Hopewell Indians are in fact the Nephites. I'm still admitting people, my apologies. All right. So while the phrase pre-Columbian era literally refers only to the time preceding Christopher Columbus' voyages of 1492. In practice, the phrase is usually used to denote the entire history of indigenous American cultures until those cultures were either extinguished, diminished, or extensively altered by Europeans. And if you think of the Nephite people, they were in fact all of those things. So what is in a name? Let's go ahead and have a look at this section of Wayne's material.
Okay, our next section here, this is the Hopewell Mound Builders, and what's in a name. We're going to discover what this Hopewell is and how it began and how the name was attached. And that's what I'm going to show you next right here. By about 1890, now all this mass destruction had been really, this whole thing had been hurt, the whole archaeological picture. However, there was no infrastructure to accept artifacts, accept data, to gather things. Things were all done privately. Some places did help and some things were preserved. A lot of stuff has been lost. But by 1890, this place right here, this is the North Fork Works. This place was relatively intact and in very good shape. And the Smithsonian talked to the landowner who owned this place. It was part of his farm. And they made an arrangement that they'd come here and to excavate these mounds. If you'll notice there in the bottom, the Great Pyramid, the Roman Colosseum, Mound 25, which is the big part in this photo, and the Stonehenge. All those are done to scale. So look at that and then look at the earthworks next to it. And you can see how large these Hopewell structures are, the enclosures. And this is actually the biggest mound. Now this is called a conjoined mound because each one touches the other one. It overlaps. And so in the archaeological record, they call it conjoined. And this is the biggest because it is conjoined. It's absolutely huge. And what they discover here and what they decide to call it will set a precedent for the entire Hopewell interaction sphere. And that's very important. So let's take a look at what's going on here. This Hopewell Mound group, this Hopewell culture, is located on the North Fork of Paint Creek in Union Township, Ross County, Ohio. When first surveyed in the mid-1800s, the mound and earthwork complex, once referred to as the Clark Works, contained 38 mounds of various sizes and a 111-acre, somewhat of a D-shaped walled enclosure. An attached segmented square enclosed additional 18 acres. The most notable mound in the group is referred to as Mound 25. That's the conjoined mound, a three-part conjoined mound that once measured 35 feet high by 500 feet long and 180 feet wide at the base. It was this mound, more than any other, that was the source of many of the iconic artifacts. Now, this is really important, that defined the Hopewell culture of 100 BC to AD 400. Now, a couple things I got to mention. The Hopewell move across the Midwest, beginning at 550 BC and ending up in Western New York. Of course, at their demise at 385, we call it 400 AD. The point is, whatever state you're in, everybody's beginning date is a little different because it's either earlier or older than the state next to it, depending where you're moving from the west to the east. And so as you go to the west, the dates become older for their point of origin. Instead of 100 BC, it'll become 300 BC and then eventually 500 BC. So this right here is based on the state of Ohio. I want to make that clear. But also that this mound, the iconic artifacts that define the Hopewell culture, this is extremely important. Now let's go on. The Hopewell Mound group was extensively investigated in the early 1890s by Warren Moorhead. This material is now housed in the Chicago Field Museum. In the 1920s, Henry Chatrone of the Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society also did extensive field work at this site. Now this right here is the North Fork Earthworks. And you notice it's close to water. Remember how big this thing is, absolutely huge. And we're going to focus on that D-shaped area. That's what's being excavated. The black area you see on the top, that's a ditch. that goes on those sides. And then the berm is raised, and on that berm would be your wooden stockade. And this right here is Captain Mordecai C. Hopewell. Mordecai C. Hopewell is the farmer that owns this location. You can see his house is outlined there next to the road where it was eventually cut. And Mordecai Hopewell, because this was his place, all the artifacts out of here became Hopewell. And so from this time forward, any mound earthworks that matches what was found here will now be called Hopewell. Okay. All right. So there's mound 25 right there, smack in the middle. And this up here, I'm going to show you some photos on this corner so you can appreciate how high that bluff is. The bluff is very, very significant because of fortifying the area down in the flats. So right here, you can see the arrows off to your right. That's my friend Fritz Zimmerman. He's actually on that corner right where the arrow shows. And I'm a little further down on the inside. You can see the berm. And that lower right-hand corner, that is the ditch up on top. So the wall structure would be to your left there on the high bushy area. And again, if this were all mowed by big mowers, you would see this much better. But it's so overgrown, it's very difficult, not to mention the fact of it's sloughing off after being 1,600 years old or better, that we're lucky it's in this good shape at all. But here is one of the drawings that's at the location. You can see the ditch here. They don't show the walled enclosure on top of the
We've lost sound. We can't hear anything.
Paul, take your computer off of mute.
that will and that do define the Hopewell culture of the Midwest, 100 BC to 400 AD for Ohio. Now, we do have some archaeologists that are crying foul. It's Dr. Troy Case and Christopher Carr. They came in and they have researched the existing material. They haven't even done a dig, but they found out this photograph right here. This is Moorhead. Moorhead's in the middle back, the guys with the suit coats on. He's pictured in the middle. And out of this mound, Mound 25, remember, this is going to set the stage for Hopewell, 69 copper and iron celts or axes, 92 copper and iron breastplates. Now, I can tell you right now, I have been in probably just about every Hopewell museum from Missouri to New York. And I will tell you, you will never see anything from the Hopewell in iron. You'll see copper, but they have never shown iron. And why would that be? Because iron represents a higher technology. It represents a higher society of people. The whole point here was to dumb down the Native Americans. It was also to appreciate so that there'd be no connection with the Eastern Hemisphere so that America could run free without any entanglements. And this archaeological data has been suppressed flat out. And these two guys here, Troy Case and Christopher Carr, they've taken the heat from their fellow archaeologists by bringing forth the material and the information that's been known since the 1890s or even before. And they're saying, hey guys, it's time to bring this out to the forefront. And this is taken right out of their book. Most excavations of Ohio Hopewell ceremonial sites occurred from the 1840s through the 1920s. Now here's the key. unpublished information, on-site layouts, features, artifacts, skeletal series from these investigations, and some later ones have discouraged the analysis and cultural interpretation of the material legacy of Ohio Hopewell people. In one single mound, identified as Mound 25, Warren K. Moore had uncovered 69 copper and iron and 92 copper and iron breastplates. So there you are. Here is Dr. Case and Christopher Carr calling out their fellow archaeologists and anthropologists. Let's get the unpublished information out to the public because it has been suppressed. And this is in a book, The Scioto Hopewell and Their Neighbors. And I recommend the book highly. Support these guys so they can continue this fight. This information needs to come out. It's really just that simple. This comes from Ancient Monuments in the Mississippi Valley, and I just love this, and it's a quote from that book, and I want to share it with you. Think about what we just talked about, all the mounds that are gone, the embankments, the fortifications, and this is the quote. The forested canopy of North America's trees kept a secret that would not be realized until the late 1830s, when a great work was set in motion to survey the earthen mounds, the embankments, circles, rectangles, causeways, etc., of an ancient people who have long since slept beneath the soil blanket of the Ohio and the Mississippi River territories. E.G. Squire and E.H. Davis, who preserved a small but important portion of these monuments, did so within the pages of their notes from the surveys and explorations published in 1847 and 1849, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, Aboriginal Monuments of Western New York. Two separate books. I highly recommend both books.
All right. I share my screen again, and let's talk about what's in a name. So, as you might imagine, I'm handling a lot of logistics right now, people still trying to get on board. My apologies for that. Some of the, I know the volume has kind of faded in and faded out, but I trust that everybody can see Hopewell Mound Builders. What's in a name? What did we just cover? Well, what's in a name is rather significant. Mordecai Hopewell is the gentleman who had Mound 25, and it was at this site that all of these extraordinary archaeological finds were unearthed, and ever since then, everything that has been labeled mound builders has been labeled Hopewell after Mordecai Hopewell. Unfortunately, though, many of these excavations came to a screeching halt because why? It supports the Pre-Columbian model or diffusionist model, which is obviously quite unpopular. Reference points. I thought you'd appreciate this. I'm going to leave this up here for just a second. And when you get the recorded version of this, and all of you will be welcome to that recorded version at a future date. But these are the individuals that are currently regarded most highly by those of us in this circle of diffusionists or pre-Columbians or those that parallel the Hopewell Indians with the Nephite nation. Excellent book. I know that some of you already have this book, and it's highly recommended by Wayne himself. So, Hopewell Mound Builders, what did Joseph actually know? This is the next chapter, and this one I find especially interesting because many people actually discredit Joseph Smith as having any knowledge at all as to where the Nephite nation is. So this is going to be very, very interesting, and let me cue this up.
Okay, what did Joseph know? Well, from what I have read, searching many volumes of early church history, Joseph knew a lot. But the point is, he wasn't here to write a archaeology book, a history book, an anthropology book. He was here to write and to put out the Book of Mormon, especially to the Lamanites. It's a book addressed to them in particular. And to share the gospel and to bring this gospel of Jesus Christ to light, that Jesus was here and walked this Western Hemisphere and came here and visited these people after his crucifixion. But Joseph left us a lot of neat stuff. And you can get it direct from him on various locations and places, but you can also get it direct from the people who surrounded Joseph in those early days. They were all together. And I really like to think about in the beginning, there was one hill. There was no confusion in the early members of the church. Cumorah in New York was the hill, no question. And yet we have questioned that to death today, that Joseph didn't do this and Joseph didn't say that. And we don't need all that because we've got so much other things that Joseph has testified to that'll back it up. And one we have to go to his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. And she talks about spending time with Joseph in the evenings before he got super busy and was out of the house. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings in every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly, as if he had spent his whole life with them. That's from his mother. Now here we have from Wilford Woodruff and from John Taylor, both in the Journal of Discourses. They are testifying to the fact that Joseph received all kinds of help from visions and personal revelations and visitations by holy angels sent from God. John Taylor himself says 47 heaven-sent angelic visitors that he knew of during Joseph's ministry. I mean, this is incredible. And when you read other statements by Joseph, especially like at his happening at the Enon Mound, when he goes there and the things that he says, you can begin to appreciate that he knows, even though he's here today in the flesh, at that time, he's also got a foot in the other side of the veil because he is seeing things constantly. It's just a continuous role for him on both sides. It just had to be incredible to spend time with him personally, to be with Joseph. Now, one of the things that has really been missed, and I'm thankful for Jonathan Neville, he brought this out. Joseph commissioned Oliver Cowdery to write 8 letters. And these 8 letters, there's things that he wanted to put out to the church body as a whole. And the one big one that was really missed is on archaeology and location, geography. Letter 7. If you haven't read letter 7, please go get letter 7. Look it up, find it. It's in the church historical information. It's also in Jonathan Neville's book by Oliver Cowdery, page 58. And he says at about 1 mile west rises another ridge of less height, running parallel with the former, that is Hill Cumorah, leaving a beautiful valley between. The fact that here between these hills, the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredites and the Nephites were destroyed. In this valley fell the remaining strength and pride of a once powerful people, the Nephites, once so highly favored of the Lord, but at that time in darkness, doomed to suffer extermination by the hand of their barbarous and uncivilized brethren. Parley P. Pratt spent a lot of time with Joseph, especially near the end of Joseph's days. And Parley also put this out, a little pamphlet that he used to proselyte with called The Voice of Warning. And look how he describes Hill Cumorah. Parley is telling how Moroni has just abridged the records, and then, and I quote, he deposited them carefully in the earth on a hill, which was then called Cumorah, situated in Ontario County, township of Manchester, and the state of New York, North America. Now I ask you, how plain can that be? Joseph would have seen all of this. Joseph would have stood up and corrected Parley in a heartbeat, or even Oliver Cowdery if it was wrong to assume that Hill Cumorah and Palmyra was the actual hill for the battle, not just a hill for the deposit of the records, but the battle also took place. And here it is, Cumorah, Ontario County, Township of Manchester, State of New York, North America. It just can't be made any plainer. Numerous visitors. I wanted to show this nice and big so you can see this. President Wilford Woodruff shared that the prophet Joseph Smith was taught for years by the visions and the revelations by his holy angels. John Taylor, as I've already mentioned, talks about all these heaven-sent angelic visitors during his ministry. And both of these are in the Journal Discourses, and you can easily look these up. You've probably got the set in your own home. Also, as you get back into the writings of Joseph in a time period of 1830 and on, when the book was published, the Book of Mormon, he talks about the Lamanites. And they also mention the Lamanites in the West. Now, a lot of people, a long time, the minute you say West, you're back in Montana and the Dakotas, or California even, or Arizona, New Mexico. And he said, no, 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 no. In their day, the Western Territory was the Ohio Valley, between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains. That is the West. And when he's talking about the Indians in the West, the native people of this country, he's talking principally about the Algonquin-speaking Native Americans who reside there. And of course, in their Second General Conference of 26 September 1830, this is when the Lord commanded Oliver Cowdery through the prophet Joseph to go unto the Lamanites and preach my gospel to them. And Peter Whitmer, Parley P. Pratt, Zebba Peterson were called to accompany Oliver on this first official church mission. And that's to the Lamanites in the West. And then, of course, in your own Doctrine and Covenants, section 32, and History of the Church, volume 1, pages 118 to 120, you can get a broader and bigger picture of what all this happened, how it took place. Joseph Smith sends Oliver Cowdery, Parley Pratt, Zebba Peterson, and Peter Whitmer Jr. to preach the gospel to the Lamanites residing in the West, revealing to them the sacred book with the history of their forefathers. And there they are, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. There's your natives. These are the first guys that get preached the gospel to. So you ask yourself, did Joseph make a mistake by not running down into Central America? We won't go into Central America for approximately 70 years. So did Joseph really screw up here? Did he make a big mistake? My thoughts are no, he didn't. He did exactly what he was told to do and where he was supposed to go. He went to the Algonquin-speaking nations of the western frontier at that time, which was the valley of the Ohio and the Mississippi River. That's where he went, and that's where he sent his first apostles. Joseph, in the 12th of February of 1833, he had a whole 2 or 3, 4-page letter to be published by Seaton, editor of the Rochester newspaper. And, dear sir, this is after it came out. Joseph responds, writes back to him, I was somewhat disappointed on receiving my paper with only a part of my letter inserted in it. The letter which I wrote you for publication, I wrote by the commandment of God, and I am quite anxious to have it all laid before the public, for it is of importance to them. Notice, commandment of God. So Joseph never got the whole thing published, but it's in the church historical record. And here's the part that refers to North America. The Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians. By it, we learn that our western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph who was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America is a promised land unto them. Now, as I mentioned previously, I spent my first 19 years in the church reading a lot about Hopewell. It was one of my hobbies. I loved it. Also learning the gospel, teaching classes, and again, not realizing or even begin to consider that Central America might be the wrong location. Because in 1989, 1,400 miles one way was Salt Lake Temple for my wife and I. And go out there, we would, of course, go to primarily to get the food storage. And while she's doing that, I'm in the bookstores buying books. So we would throw our stuff in the back of the car. And when I got up to the top of the back seat or the window, that's when we knew we had to go home. So we filled up our car with food storage and books. And I got this book by Dean C. Jesse. And this book is what really started me on the road to what I'm doing here this evening. Because when I read what I'm going to show you right now, and as I've talked to many saints around the country, very few people have seen this portion. June 4, 1834, Zion's Camp. Joseph leaves Kirtland, Ohio, and he's crossing all the way through Illinois, headed for Missouri. And here's the sections of the letter he wrote for Emma. We arrived this morning on the banks of the Mississippi. We left the eastern part of the state of Ohio, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and bones as proof of its divine authenticity. Signed, Joseph Smith, Jr. I got to tell you, when I read this letter, everything for me just collided. Central America and North America collided. The Nephites collided with the Maya, and I just knew something was wrong. And that's when I really began to search this area for Hopewell, and I began looking for what I call parallels to figure out what in the world is going on. Something is, it's just not right here. I feel like we really lost some terrific information. So as you press on in Joseph, when he and the fellows and get to the Zelph Mound at Griggsville, Illinois, which this is, they have a tremendous experience here. And when they got here, on top of that mound, there was a stone altar that Joseph recognized. Now listen to his own words as we get to the altar. He says, during our travels, we visited several of the mounds which had been thrown up by the ancient inhabitants of this country, Nephites, Lamanites, etc. And this morning I went up on a high mound near the river. On the top of the mound were stones which presented the appearance of 3 altars, having been erected one above the other, according to the ancient order. Now you see right there, here's Joseph telling us, according to the ancient order, yet there's only way you could have seen that would be through a visitation or being taught or trained by one of these visitors that Woodworth and Taylor spoke about. And this is a terrific example after the ancient order. So he recognized it right off. And the remains of the bones were strewn over the surface of the ground. The brethren procured a shovel and a hoe, and removing the earth to the depth of about 1 foot, discovered the skeleton of a man almost entire, and between his ribs the stone point of a Lamanitish arrow, which evidently produced his death. Elder Burr Riggs retained the arrow. It continues. The contemplation of the scenery around us produced peculiar sensations in our bosoms, and subsequently the visions of the past being opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty. Here's Joseph, a direct revelation with all this accompanying of men around him. I discovered that the person whose skeleton was before us was a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man, and a man of God. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and a chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas, who was known from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, to the Rocky Mountains. The curse was taken from Zelph, or at least in part. One of his thigh bones was broken by a stone flung from a sling while in battle years before his death. He was killed in battle by the arrow found among his ribs during the last great struggle of the Lamanites and Nephites. Now, Hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, what body of water does Cumorah of Palmyra back up to? And the answer is Lake Ontario. So for me, that is a high candidate, a high probability that the Ontario is indeed our Eastern Sea. And that last great struggle of the Lamanites and Nephites also is extremely important, which we'll get to in a minute. Unfortunately, in the history of the church of 1948, everything was corrected. But previous to this, if you had a set of the history of the church, these key words were omitted. And luckily, someone put them back in by 1948. It says, through error, the part of this quotation naming the hill Cumorah and specifying that Zelph had died in the last great struggle was omitted in editions prior to 1948. It was, however, quoted correctly as written by the prophet and here given in volume 6 of the Times and Seasons of January 6, 1846. So it was corrected. Appreciate that. Now, the Dixon Mound, Illinois archaeologists, they are fully aware that this mound had been somewhat tampered with by Joseph's company digging up in the mound. They also knew there was a few pot hunters that had gotten there in the late 1970s. But they came through here and did a dig and cut a trench right through the center of this big mound. And the scar is still there today. They did not put it back together, but the bulk of it is still there of the mound. The timeline they came up with first was 250 AD plus or minus 150 years, and then they readjusted it to 350 to 380 AD. That timeline totally supports the prophet's claims, that the mound was built up during the last great struggle. The last great struggle began at 322 and ends in 385. And here they've dated it 350 to 380 AD, right in a Hopewell timeline of their demise, according to archaeology of North America. And here our prophet has nailed it, and yet the word Hopewell is nowhere in his vocabulary. It hasn't even come to light yet. He does not understand, but right now he has placed it absolutely correct with the archaeologists that have dug this mound. And the archaeologist is Alan Harn at the Dixon Mounds. And then Heber C. Kimball, he writes in his journal, I just want to highlight this here. He says in the last destruction among the Lamanites, that his name was Zelph. He just talks about this here to show a support for Joseph. And down at the bottom, that brother Joseph had inquired of the Lord, and it was made known to him in a vision. So there's several like this that support brother Joseph, all a little different. They're all writing separately. There's about 4 or 5 of these, and they're all in the church history office and various books. I got this one out of Doctrine of Salvation by Joseph Fielding. Now, 4 years later, on the Kirtland Camp March, they will get to Huntsville. And here in Huntsville, Missouri, this is the time when Joseph identifies Huntsville as the location for the city of Manti. And we have a couple of those also that exist. Doctrine of Salvation, Joseph F. put them out, but they're also in the church historian's office. The camp passed through Huntsville, Randolph County, which has been appointed as one of the stakes of Zion and is the ancient site of the city of Manti. Samuel Tyler writes on September 25th of 1838, we passed through Huntsville County, seat of Randolph County. This is the ancient site of the city of Manti, which is spoken of in the Book of Mormon. Now, here's something we can look at. If Huntsville is Manti, in the Book of Mormon, Manti is in a southerly direction from the city of Zarahemla, which means Zarahemla has to be north of Huntsville, which is going to put it into Iowa or Minnesota. We also know that the waters of Mormon, the land of Mormon, the forests of Mormon are south of Manti in a southward direction, and that the fountain, the great fountain of pure water, is also in that area. Can't say this is the waters of Mormon, but I will say this would be a target for a possibility. If you go to Big Springs, Missouri, you will find the largest freshwater spring in North America, 275 million gallons of water coming out of the earth on the average every single day of the year. And that's called a fountain of pure water. And I think it would be a real good candidate for our Big Springs, Missouri water of Mormon. There it is. That's a picture of it. It's bubbling up there in the back, that white you see there by the rock. It's about a 20, 30 foot hole. And you can see the beautiful colors it puts out. It's absolutely beautiful. Fresh water coming up out of the earth. We go here on tours, and we have our people take their bottles, and we kneel down up there at the top end and get fill our water bottles, and we get our water. Another one I want to talk about is the Wentworth Letter. A lot of good things in Wentworth Letter, but the one that I really like is this is my favorite. The principal nation of the second race fell in battle towards the close of the 4th century. The remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country. Joseph is standing in Nauvoo, Illinois, when he says this country. And when he says country, now you've got borders. Borders. Borders make a country. If there's no borders, there is no country. It's just a territory, maybe even, I don't know if it's even a province. But the point is, when he says country, and he says this country, he's referring to the United States of America, in my opinion. Brigham Young talks of Cumorah. Brigham, before his death, he had a story, a witness from Oliver Cowdery, and he wanted to share it to make sure it didn't go with him to the grave. And this is what he put out. When Joseph got the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the hill Cumorah, which he did. Oliver says that when Joseph and Oliver went to the hill, the hill opened, and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. They laid the plates on the table. Under this table, there was a pile of plates as much as 2 feet high, and in this room, more plates probably than many wagon loads. The first time they went there, the sword of Laban hung upon the wall. But when they went again, it had been taken down and laid upon the table across the gold plates. It was unsheathed, and on it was written these words: This sword will never be sheathed again until the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our God and his Christ. And that's in the Journal of Discourses. I just want to point out, notice, first time when they went there, but they went again a second time. How many times were they in Hill Cumorah? And what were they doing? If they returned the plates at the end, what did they do when they went there without returning the plates? Just something to think about. Very interesting. Now, I got to tell you something. I don't know how to take this, but I think the Lord has a sense of humor. I was baptized in July. It was, I got to think it was a Wednesday. Just finished summer school session. Going to graduate the coming January. And I was into antiques, raising money to pay for my schooling and helping along the way. And I drove home to my folks' place in northern Wisconsin to go to an auction that following Friday and Saturday. At the auction, I was there to buy furniture, because that's what I did. I refinished furniture. But the auctioneer held up a box of books, and I'm at least 100 feet away, maybe even more. And when he held that box up, he tipped it up on its sides. You could see the backs of the books. My eyes, I could see the back of this book, the spine. And I could see it said Book of Mormon. And I started bidding on this box of books, and I got them really cheap. It's like $6. I went up there and I pulled this book out of the box, and I gave the box back to the auctioneer, and I said, hey, sell it again. Well, this is the book I picked up. This is Northern States Mission, 1907. It's a third printing. What I've since learned is that where the missions were, they printed their own Book of Mormons they used to hand out to people. And this, of course, is all done in the Chicagoland area, Northern States Mission at that time in 1907. And I had this all these years. I mean, I got this like 3 or 4 days after I got baptized. I had this book in my hands, but I didn't understand what was in it until 1989 when I woke up after 19 years of being in the church. Look at the references here from Jacob. Now this is again is showing Orson Pratt and probably Parley, but Orson for sure. He's referenced as putting all the information here regarding the Hill Cumorah and where it's at. And the top line says, and behold, this last, whose branch had withered, red. You look down to the red, says Nephites. Away, I did plant in a good spot of ground. See the yellow? You look down below. America, a good spot of ground. And then, and thou beheldest that I also cut down that which cumbered the spot of ground, green. You look down to the green, Jaredites. And thou beheldest that a part thereof brought forth good fruit, blue, Nephites, and a part thereof brought forth wild fruit, brown, Lamanites. This does not exist in our scriptures today, which you're well aware of, but this is just like, wow, this is incredible. And the ether was just loaded, and I got to share a couple here out of ether. I, Moroni, I proceed to give you an account of those ancient inhabitants who were destroyed by the hand of the Lord upon the face of this north country. North America, reference given. North America. Ether 11 and 6. And there was a great calamity in all the land. Such an one has never been upon the face of the earth, and their bones should become as heaps of earth upon the face of the land, except they should repent of their wickedness. C for reference, the ancient mounds of North America. 15, 8 through 11. And it came to pass, he came to the waters of Ripley Ancon, you look down below, supposed to be Lake Ontario. And it came to pass that the army of Coriantumr did pitch their tents by the hill Ramah. Ramah was the hill Cumorah. Isn't that something? Incredible. Well, like I said, I had this, I didn't know what I had until I, as I call it, I woke up 18 years later, maybe 19, and realized I personally felt there was a problem with using the Maya people of Central America to be our Nephites. I felt their buildings were incorrect, and we will press on and we will show more.
All right. Excellent information. So let me share just a real brief. So, well, you know what? I'm going to just continue on. Let's just continue on. Got to make sure we Sharing correctly here. Hold on. Here we go.
We call the charm, no doubt to retard the heavy moisture of the Midwest. And Squire and Davis in their books talk for it to trail off.
Hold on here, guys.
Coming out of a mound in Cherokee country. And that, yeah, it's very, very old. So here, just huge, something to look. Indian name, beyond face of the earth, and their bones should become as
I'm
heaps
struggling. Hold on.
upon the exactly. But it doesn't matter. If you look at the ending, of course, is the AH sound again. The
Here we go. Thank you.
Hopewell, Hebrew language and writing. This is really a fun one, as you're going to find out. I had the neat opportunity to meet this next fellow, Brian Stubbs. He came to one of the events held at the Expo Center there for Book of Mormon evidences, and he's a professor at Eastern Utah Blanding, and he's an epigrapher. And I have his book. I just love it. And just look what he's put down here. He said the strength of language evidence is that if enough of it has been preserved to be demonstrated linguistically, then language is among the strongest kinds of evidence. Language families cannot be fabricated. Written records unearthed in the Americas are often labeled hoaxes. But language ties, when apparent, show specific ties from ancient to modern times, and the thousands of speakers of the related languages are beyond fabrication. Now, this is absolutely wonderful. Languages are beyond fabrication. I think you're going to enjoy this a lot. Another guy, another author, Charles Mann, 1491, his book, Glottochronology, is the attempt to estimate how long ago two languages separated from a common ancestor by evaluating their degree of divergence on a list of key words. Linguists applied this technique to the Algonquin dictionaries compiled by early colonists. The results indicated that the various Algonquian languages in New England all date back to a common ancestor that appeared in the Northeast a few centuries before Christ. Now, what can I say about that? That's just incredible. A few centuries before Christ. And then he finishes by saying this ancestral language may derive from what is known as Hopewell culture. This is absolutely top shelf. So let's press on. Now, I know that you have read your scriptures, and I know you've read Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon names, and most of you probably haven't picked up on this. But when you look at it, it is absolutely amazing. As you can see, the last letters of many of the names of our prophets and key players in these scripture books end in the letters A and the letter H. Some in IAH, but they all make the sound. And this is a characteristic of many words. Hebrew words in particular. Isaiah, Noah, Terah. And you go over to the Book of Mormon, Mosiah, Zarahemnah, Amalkiah. So hang on to that. Here are Native American Indian names. I can't pronounce one of these words exactly, but it doesn't matter. If you look at the ending, of course, is the AH sound again, the sound. These are names of Indians. Algonquin Indians, may I ask? And here they are. Again, this is exactly what Stubbs is talking about. That these ties from ancient to modern times and thousands of speakers of the related language are beyond fabrication. This shows a connection from here today all the way back deep into Book of Mormon and the Old Testament times. The sound. Wonderful. Here's from the St. George Temple. This was sent up to Rod Meldrum by a friend of his, a recorder. And look at, these are a name given to kings, just like many times Nephi was reused in the Book of Mormon. Well, here we have this same name given to Native Americans, and they all end in the sound. These are Onondagas and Oneidas. Again, and taken from St. George. This is like just a page or two away from when the signers of the Declaration of Independence showed up, if you know that story, for the St. George Temple and asked to have their work done. And just a couple of pages away, we have not just this, but there's a whole list of Native American names. What we don't know is if they showed up or somehow they got there. But what's interesting, there are no Maya here, there are no Inca here, there's no Aztec here. It's all Algonquins, St. George Temple. This is really good. Ryan Fisher found this dictionary of American Indian names with the name, of course. We've got Ripley Ankin from the Book of Mormon, which means waters to exceed all. But then look down here, the Algonquins still today use that RIP to begin their word for river and for lake, rip. And then I just dropped in for Book of Mormon, hill is Ripla. And again, the Jaredite king from the Book of Ether, Riplakish. Rip means, gotta mean big, great, something that it's just, you know, obviously huge, something to look at. But there it is. Again, RIP. You can't make this up. And this again is what our good friend is talking about in language. If you can find the connections, these are solid connections. Cyrus Gordon in the 1970s, he came along after he was notified from Henriette Mertz, who spotted this in a book, and she turned it upside down. This, by the way, is upside down, but they had it as being right side up, and it was labeled as some type of Cherokee writing from Tennessee. Well, she turned it upside down, and when she did so, she realized this isn't Cherokee, this is Paleo-Hebrew, because she could recognize many of the letters. So she took it to Dr. Cyrus Gordon about what she had found out. He went straight to the Smithsonian, and they let him examine the stone, which you can see here in this black and white photo. Cyrus Gordon is top line epigrapher at his time, well respected not just in the States, but in Europe as well, from Brandeis University. And he claimed that this was absolutely authentic Paleo-Hebrew, coming out of a mound in Cherokee country. And that, yeah, it's very, very old. So here, just by chance, I find this shekel from the Jewish War. It has nothing to do with North America, but I happened to look at some letters on there, and they caught up my attention. So I took the stone, and I made a reverse, which is what you see here, the black and the white. And right down here, the Back Creek stone for Judah. That's what it claims it says. There's more, but it's been broken off on the left side there. And so right now it's for Judah. There's probably a couple more words missing. And I got this other coin here in the bottom because the letters are a little clearer. It's not quite the same as this one, but it's very, very close. But then I made a reverse of that coin from the Jewish War of 68 to 72. And I was looking at those letters and I thought, oh my goodness, look how they are exact. They are exact. And yet this stone by the epigraphers of North America has been declared fake, fraud, questionable, whatever. Anything that's found with Hebrew writing on is automatically declared fake and fraud. Why? Because nobody could sail here until Christopher Columbus arrives. Chris has to be first in their mind. They're just dead set against it, and that's their paradigm. And they have a hard time going past it. But here it is. We've got proof not only just on the word from Cyrus Gordon, but we've got a coin from the Jewish War that's not from the U.S. It's from Israel, for crying out loud. And the letters, well, you can see for yourself. They match. And here's just a couple highlight. And then I like this one too. You're all familiar with the Anton Transcript, of course. Supposedly these are exact letters taken right off the plates themselves. And this is part of what Martin Harris had. And of course, he took this little portion to Professor Anton to ask his opinion if they're right or wrong. But we bounced from that all the way to the 1970s, and a man named Dr. Barry Fell, who took up archaeology as a hobby. He's a botanist out of university, and he compared them to this book of prayers that he found the Algonquin and the Micmac. Look at the comparisons. Some are exact, some are very, very close. Anton on the left, Micmac on the right. But here it is. Anton, Micmac, Anton, Micmac. Tremendous comparison. And he found out that the Micmac did indeed are still writing and reading this language today. And the reason we have this thing called the Book of Prayers, because the Jesuits in the 1600s, on contact with the Micmacs of Newfoundland, New England, and Maine, that's the area, they had their own written language. Their own written language, which we have claimed that nobody in America has a written language, but the Micmac do, and they're Algonquin. And they noticed children writing things on birch bark and playing games and that type of thing. Well, they took the Micmac and they made a Catholic catechism so they could preach the gospel of Jesus Christ as they knew it to the Native Americans of the Northeast. And that's how the Book of Prayers came about. And that's how he found it, Dr. Barry Fell, and he compared it so nicely and realized that this was just tremendous. And then we have this stone here. Now this stone is in Davenport, Iowa, and it came out of a mound in Davenport, Iowa. And what's really interesting, the red star on the very, very top is Egyptian hieratic. That's what it's been classified as. We can't say it for sure, but it happens to be also Micmac writing on the top. The same on the Anton Transcript. And then the middle there is Punic Iberian, and there's Libyan. Punic Iberian and Libyan were used by the Phoenician sailors of the Mediterranean. And they're the ones that we believe very strongly were the sailors that brought Mulek's party to North America. And because of that, they stayed, because this came out of Iowa. I mean, this is a tremendous hit for the Mulekites' presence in Zarahemla and being in Iowa and not going to Lehi's party. And keep in mind, they stayed apart for a very, very long time. So to this evidence may be added two historical geographical facts external to the scriptures. The distance from Israel to the promised land was shorter via the Atlantic than the Pacific, and the expertise of Phoenician Mediterranean mariners was oriented west, not east, into the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And this is a quote from Dr. John L. Sorensen, who is a Mesoamerica supporter. He says, "In my view, that they traveled via the Atlantic is certain." And with that, I totally agree. It is evident from Barry Fell that the Micmac hieroglyphs must already have been transmitted to North America more than 2,000 years ago when they were still in use in Egypt. What a nice hit for the Book of Mormon. This is wonderful, Dr. Fell, Harvard University. And then we have this wonderful Decalogue stone, 10 Commandments all the way around the front, the side, and the back. A talk was given on it by Orson Pratt, delivered. You see the date there, April 10 of 1870, right in the Tabernacle. And they were totally convinced that the people of the Hopewell, of course, they didn't know them as Hopewell per se, but the people that built the mounds, there was definitely a Semitic presence in North America. And that's what he discusses here in this great talk. And here's a picture of Orson and his age. Now, just a little sidebar, look real carefully at the stone itself, the way it's shaped, with a man in the center. I happened to be in Spain visiting my daughter and her husband. They were in the military several years back. Got to go through a museum in Rome. And as I walked through the museum in Rome, I spotted these. I thought, oh my gosh, because I looked right at this one. I looked right at this one. Now I'm going to give you some blow-ups. Think about the Ohio stone you just saw. Look at that one. Look at this one. Here comes the Ohio stone. Are these not close enough to call them parallels? I believe they are. Again, showing that this type of workmanship existed on both sides of the sea and that people were here. They understood this. I mean, it's so close. It is so close.
All right, let me check.
Now, this last one here, this is something that was given to me by some friends of mine. I did not know this, and I found it very interesting. Remember when I showed you the picture of the dictionary that Ryan Fisher discovered on the Algonquin people? We now know that the dictionaries and the languages, the vocabularies, everything that the early colonists put together was so complete for the Algonquin language that from it, this man here, a Puritan missionary, John Eliot, invested 12 years of his life, and he produced the first Bible in North America, and it's written in Algonquin, front to back. And here it is on display. I mean, it's just incredible. I think the first set of scriptures for the Holy Bible written in the Algonquin language. And here it is. And of course, then bingo, just a few years later, we have the Book of Mormon coming out also. And it's, you know, here they are both side by side. And it's just really, really unique. So after 1,000 years, they're all destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. Very interesting. Algonquin language. 1663.
All right, folks, just want to point out a couple things. First and foremost, want to thank Wayne for allowing me to use this material of his because of, I mentioned earlier, inclement weather conditions and of course his rural location. Doing these type of events real time live is really challenging for him. So he allowed me to use this particular DVD. Can't recommend it enough. You just heard 4 of those chapters. I believe there's 9 or 10 in this particular DVD set. So for those of you who are, you know, obviously a part of this conference and you're a Heartland model advocate, this would obviously be one of the best DVDs to add to your collection. I'm also unabashedly going to endorse and recommend that you check out Wayne's website. His primary focus is, of course, the excavation of Zarahemla. I'm pretty confident that the vast majority of you already know that that's located across from Nauvoo. He's been looking at that piece of property now for several years at least, and has recently done some ground penetrating radar that's, you know, really been able to reveal a heck of a lot more information. So we're really excited about his work. It's perhaps some of the best archaeological work that's being done currently that supports this model. Wayne has made it possible for people to donate to his cause, which of course we really support. He's got a 501(c)(3) that he's got set up. So really encourage you to take a look at it and ask yourself if that's the kind of cause you would like to support. He also has a wonderful blog, and a lot of that information and his findings at that archaeological site are revealed. So highly encourage you to take a look at his blog. And finally, I should and cannot ignore the fact that this particular magazine of Wayne's has been around for 25 plus years. It used to be quarterly. I think he does it biannually now. I'm not exactly sure how often, but this Ancient American magazine at this particular website is it's sensational. So have a look. We're going to take ourselves a 5-minute break, and we're going to come back with Jonathan Neville. So let's give ourselves a few minutes, and I've got some more people I'm admitting into the conference real time. We've got a lot of people that have been coming on and off. I'm not sure why they're coming on and off, but I am going to take time to troubleshoot that and get a few of those, the remnant back on board. So let's take 5 minutes and we'll reconvene at, well, let's make it 6 minutes. Let's make it 1:30.